Remember your excitement when you were a kid and you woke up and discovered that your dad or mom bought you a model railroad set? Okay, now imagine how excited you'd be to find out your dad didn't just buy you a model railroad, he built you one. And he built you one that was big enough for you and your friends to ride on. Well, we discovered such a gentleman, and his present brought smiles to millions of children.
In 1928, P.A. Sturtevant, a mechanically inclined motorcycle, car, and airplane racer, who also happened to be a talented toolmaker, let his hobbies run wild. He built a rideable train for his 3-year-old son. It was a gigantic hit in the Sturtevant's Elmhurst, Illinois neighborhood. It so impressed a nearby Sears Roebuck executive that a few years later, Sturtevant was asked to run his train in the new Chicago Sears store. No surprise, it was a huge hit there too. And so the Miniature Train and Railroad Company was formed. By 1940, more than a dozen department stores were leasing rideable trains that wound through the stores on a 10-inch track. Trains that were incredibly popular with the kids, the parents, and the stores.
They were different. They enabled kids to stand in line for a long time and give the parents a chance to shop. That was a genius of a gentleman here in Elmhurst that came up with that at the Sears store. Started at Sears here in Chicago. It was then the world's largest store, WLS. That's where the radio station came from. They wanted to promote it as being different, and the train running inside the store with the kids waiting to ride the train was a novelty that just spread like wildfire. Also, PA had an advertising bend to him that got it spread out pretty quickly amongst other stores and other places. It was a sideline to his machining business, and he had people on the road everywhere. So whatever there was a big store that could have the room to run a train, he'd make a contact.
Department stores weren't the only ones who jumped on the miniature train craze. Amusement parks and carnivals with portable rides exploded in popularity, and the now diesel miniature train was a big reason why. There were other builders in the 1940s, but none as prolific as the MT and RC. The coming baby boom would fuel growth even more.
Amusement parks had gone through a rough time before the Depression and became another center of entertainment during the war because it was affordable and kind of a throwback. There was a nostalgia for amusement parks from the 20s that occurred in the 40s and 50s. With the baby boom coming around, it was an explosion. Pre-war, there were about 100 major amusement parks. By the mid-1950s, there were over 700 in the United States. The new phenomenon that came up because of the baby boom was the idea of kiddie lands that were small parks, 20, 30 acres in the urban areas, and they just sprung up all over. Drive-in theaters arose at the exact same time as kiddie lands, and the crest came when they started putting kiddie lands in drive-in theaters. 2 rides were the key rides in any kind of an amusement center: a Ferris wheel and the train. Everybody rode the train, everybody would ride the train 2 or 3 times.
But times change, and so did the miniature train business. By the mid-1950s, automobiles made close-to-home entertainment less necessary. Kiddie lands and drive-ins were closing. Lawyers and liability added pressure, and Sturtevant himself was growing older. He sold his company to a New York-based maker of amusement park rides, which, at the end of the century, became the Allen Herschel Factory Museum in North Tonawanda, New York. But the trains have not disappeared. They were reliably built machines that stood the test of time. Sturtevant didn't follow the manufacturing mantra of planned obsolescence. His trains were built to last. Some are held by private owners, a reliable link to their past.
I, first of all, had a steam locomotive, and we were finding problems with getting the engine to go out on the track, taking an unusual amount of time, so I started looking around for one of the Rensselaer diesels, which I had experience with, working at Kiddie Land and actually being there as a child. And so eventually I found an engine that was for sale in Indiana at one of the amusement parks over there and proceeded to bring it home. Well, we use it for passenger service. We use it for constructing of the railroad, as we're still building the railroad, which we have now about 6,000 feet of track down, and we're still building.
Some still run at small amusement parks, bringing smiles just as they did back at the Sears store. And you don't have to be a miniature person to ride a miniature train.
This has been an amusement park since the 1950s, and we've had trains since then. The park has over 2 million visitors a season. Our season runs May to September. And I think it's so popular because anybody can ride it, from infants all the way up to senior citizens. And there's just something about riding an old train that brings back, I think, a lot of memories for a lot of older people, and something they can show off to their grandkids.
Actually, they're very simple to keep running. It's a standard gas type engine, which we converted over to propane. But it's just like a typical car of the older vintage. We don't have points anymore. They have electronic ignition, but gas-driven, electric start, 12-volt systems, lights, just basic automotive type technology. We do a regular routine maintenance daily on the trains. We pull them out of the depot and we check over all the brakes, make sure all the brakes are adjusted properly. Vacuum cylinders are working. They check over the engines for fluids and normal maintenance, fluids, fluid levels, operation running. They're gas-driven. Check all the suspension on them, make sure they're safe for the riders. We walk the tracks daily to see if there's any obstructions on the rails, or any movements or any adjustments that have to be made on the rails at all.
Insurance has killed the amusement park trains. Right now, the current trains being built by Chance Manufacturing have to have wheelchair lifts. They have to meet environmental standards beyond belief. They have to be running in fenced-in areas where there's no accessibility to anybody to get to the track. But they're still selling. Chance Manufacturing sold more trains in the last 2 years than they did in the last 20. So yeah, they are coming back.
So they are not gone, certainly not forgotten, and possibly making a comeback. Who would have guessed that a talented toolmaker's simple wish to build a plaything for his little boy would have such an impact on the entertainment industry? And who would have guessed that generations later, that same small train is still making such big, big smiles?